We are now ready for our second workshop, Emerging from Crisis and Preparing for the Future. We're really honored to have David Harris and Frank Reece from Interim Executive Solutions to talk about this very important topic. David and Frank are both Harvard grads with extensive experience helping nonprofits with strategy, governance, and effectiveness. I'm really looking forward to learning from them today. We're going to learn things such as what challenges, opportunities, and questions lie ahead. How can we make our mission even more relevant? What might the future hold for funding, staffing, service delivery, relationships, partners, and other things we probably haven't even considered? And what steps should we take and when? Remember, both David and Frank's bios are on the NPC website, and they are both broadcasting from Cambridge, Massachusetts today. We are very excited to have them. David and Frank, you are on. Take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. There were three. One of our partners who was able to make time to join us is also on this, Chris Dame. And as you will see, without any prompting, we all managed to come up with the same color striped shirts. So it's a true partnership that the three of us have here with our little organization. Let me start up the slideshow and give you a brief introduction, and then you'll get an opportunity to hear from Frank. And I'm sure as we go along, you'll hear from Chris. He'll chip in also. But thank you so much to the Berkshire Center for Nonprofits for giving us this opportunity. I've been listening in on some of the other things that have been taking place over the last day or so, and this is clearly just a really precious community and very tight-knit and a group of people who really are very supportive of each other, and we're very pleased to be a part of this event. Before I even make introductions, though, I sort of want to set some context. And one thing that was done very recently is a survey of nonprofits, looking at what nonprofits have done in the short term in this time of challenge. And I don't think it'll be any surprise to any of you the kinds of things that you see here, because I'm sure many of the organizations here have had to do some of these things too. Our presentation is going to be very much future thinking, but let's set the context for where we are. This crisis has forced 91% of nonprofits to either curtail or adapt their services. It's caused 80% to move some or all of their programming online, which is actually a huge positive, I think, statement of people's flexibility to deliver what value they need to deliver. 18% have had to lay off or furlough employees. Fortunately, that number isn't higher because of the PPP, for instance. 83% has moved their operations to work from home. There are some that clearly don't have that luxury. 69% have applied for CARES Act funding, but less than half have actually received it. And if you think about that in the context of how many have been able to keep their employees, you're very proud of this sector for really hanging on to employees as long as we can. 90% have, however, experienced revenue loss, and that's leading about a quarter to consider partnerships such as mergers. And we'll talk more about the future in a moment. 44% unfortunately do expect they may need to make further reductions, although hopefully the announcement that Massachusetts can slowly reopen will limit how much that really has to happen. And 55% expect they may have to continue to reduce services. So we're in a challenging spot, but we think there's opportunity going forward. And one of the things that we believe is there's no such thing as going back to normal. There's going to be new normals, and that's largely what we hope to explore with you. We want this to be highly interactive. Please do use the chat function to share your thoughts, and we're going to at certain points ask you to put your ideas out there, and also in the Q&A if you're willing to come on and share some of your strategies and so on. with the other people on this call. Please do take us up on that offer. With that in mind, let me give you just an overview of how this presentation is going to break down. We're going to talk about crisis response strategies, and then we're going to talk about how we can uncover opportunities in this crisis. We'll specifically talk about considerations in restarting operations, preparing for the future, and ultimately managing change, because change is going to be a constant for all of us for some time to come. Brief background on us. Our organization, Interim Executive Solutions, has been in operation for 5 years. We're business and nonprofit professionals that are focused on strengthening the nonprofit sector during times of leadership or business transition. This is clearly a time of business transition for all, but we also work with organizations undergoing leadership transitions to put in interim executive directors or interim CFOs to help them to come out stronger on the other side of those transitions. We are the 3 partners that you see, and we've had a wide range of experiences, and you'll hear about some of that as we go forward. Briefly though, we want to just check in on your roles so we have some context for how you're looking at this issue. So if you wouldn't mind, PJ or Elizabeth, popping up the first poll, we'd like to know who you are, and you can choose all that apply because we know many of you have multiple hats. So just go ahead and put that information in and hit the submit button. I don't know exactly how to assess once we've got a significant number of results, but I'll leave that up to whoever initiated the poll to pop up the results as soon as we have them. And I think even as you put the results up, people can continue to put in their responses and it will tabulate them. So here we go. We have almost half of you are in leadership roles in nonprofits, about 40% are board members. We have about 13% of funders and philanthropists and a number of consultants and advisors. And so really great smattering of experiences and knowledge that you bring to this discussion of how we're going to move forward as an organization, in your organizations. So with that said, I'm going to turn the first section over to my partner, Frank Reece, to talk about how to approach crises.
Thank you, David, and welcome everybody. I'm going to close this little poll. And David, I seem to have closed off the slides as well. That was a mistake.
I may have been.
There we go.
Okay.
Talk about crisis. We'll have to be fast on our feet today. Welcome, everyone. My name again is Frank Reece, one of the 3 partners. I'm currently serving on a few nonprofit boards. My specialty, if there were one, would to be an executive coach. I also spent some time on board governance issues, looking at board bylaws, committee meetings, that type of thing. And as David said, we have a great representation today from a variety of important roles within the nonprofit community. Board members, we have funders, we have key staff people, so welcome. David, if I could have the next slide on approaching our crisis. We look at the top 10, a list of 10 steps that we hope our clients are taking in this very unprecedented time. First of all, in a situation like this, we need to face the facts, face them squarely, spend some time as best you can to dig into what the facts are. Of course, in this current situation, facts are coming to the forefront every day as this is unprecedented. But if we were in a crisis, a financial crisis or a personnel crisis, the most important thing to do is to dig in and find the facts. And oftentimes it's very important for the board chair or key board individual to work very closely with the executive director in digging in to say, what is the real situation? If the engine light goes on your dashboard, what is actually happening under the hood? And getting to those facts as fast as we can. Also, in facing the facts, make sure that your core values of the organization are guiding the decision making that you're about to enter into. Those core values, as Peter Drucker once said, the core values and culture eat strategy for breakfast. So these are really the guiding principles of your organization. Who are you and what do you stand for? Third on the list is to be as transparent as possible. Don't keep any skeletons in the closet as you communicate with your constituency and your stakeholders. Be as transparent as possible. If you found a mess, we need to talk about the mess. If there's a very sensitive, you think it's confidential, it will most likely leak out at some point. So you need to be in front of it and be as transparent as you possibly can be. And having dug up the facts and understanding the situation, important to put together an action team of trusted individuals, probably a team of key staff members and key board members to build an action plan. In building the action plan, make sure that change is part of that plan and that change is as impactful as possible. Bold changes, whether it's closing your college in this situation where in Cambridge, the students had 4 days notice that they needed to leave campus. That was a bold decision that had to be made, and the colleges here were very transparent about the purposes for those changes. The plan needs to be implemented as best you can early. Boldness if possible, as I mentioned, but also have a plan that supports your staff, which is really your key resource, and helping the staff adapt to the new reality in front of them. What are the situations that they're going to be asked to support, and are they safe? Is the organization safe? Again, sort of reinforcing up on number 2, the core values that represent your group or your organization. What are the driving forces of supporting individuals? Down the list a little bit, but still just as important, is your funders are going to have you under a magnifying glass as to whether you are continuing to manage their money carefully. Make sure that they know what you have discovered and what you are going to do to resolve the issue. Funders, again, are your best friends in a crisis. If need be, you could ask them if a restricted grant, for example, could be used in this situation for operating issues. And again, as I mentioned earlier, communicate, communicate, communicate. The 3 laws of real estate are location, location, location. The 3 laws of a crisis are to communicate with your stakeholders, your constituencies, whether that be board, staff, clients, funders, or the public. Again, the public is going to, the public is going to measure you against your values and the culture of your organization. don't forget that you have legal obligations as an organization. Um, Certainly in situations where you have federal monies or you have state monies, you have legal obligations to comply with. You do not want legal issues spread in the wake of these changes, and you certainly don't want to have a pile of legal issues during a time when you're trying to come out on the other side of a crisis. And number 10 of our top 10 helpful steps is to make sure in the corner of your eye and every once in a while in your focus, what are the governance issues that you might learn that need to be tweaked or refined? Do your bylaws allow, for example, for proxy votes? Do your bylaws allow for remote meetings? What sequence of events needs to take place in committee meetings? Do you have some committee meetings that ought to meet weekly now instead of quarterly? And does your board action team communicate with the rest of the board, and are your governance issues aligned with responding to a crisis? So those are the top 10, David. And Chris, as you know, oftentimes what we need to do is make sure that we're tracking key metrics and that we're on top of those 10 issues. The key messages to key metrics to track include cash flow projections. What does your bank account look like? Do you have the financial resources to make it through a crisis? Are there sources in danger of being lost? Are you losing gate receipts as if you are running a small museum or a botanic garden? Are there no visitation? It means no gate receipts, and how are you going to fill that hole? So do you have financial resources in danger, or do you have issues like your sources of food for the food pantry? Are your sources under stress? Do we need new sources to help support our deliverables? And are there obligations that come with new sources? And how do we look at the variable and semi-variable costs that maybe need to be squeezed down, and perhaps some actually programs mothballed? With the cash flow projections, and if we're squeezing some of our variable and semi-variable costs, what is the program impact on those? Can we utilize our current services, and can we protect our continuity of funding, for example, with our program impact and the potential need for new services and new funding? Do we have an opportunity, in fact, to expand our services during this situation? And are there ways to have new sources of funding? Oftentimes, you'll be in a situation where you're looking at cutting a program where one might be able to link on with another sister organization or like-minded organization for programming. And perhaps one of the most important ones to reinforce your culture as an organization is to pay attention to staff morale. Getting back to Peter Drucker, the culture of your organization and how you respond to a crisis with staff morale. What do you feel is in the best interest of the staff, and how do the staff feel during this crisis? Are they safe? Do they feel secure? Are they comfortable with the leadership of the organization? Do they have some confidence that we're going to get through this storm, battered and bruised, but come out the other side? And while you're concerned about individuals within the organization and folks that you have been long-term employees and you want to protect moving into the future, you also have to balance that with what is the interests of the organization, so that as you come through it, long-term staff feel that they have been treated more than appropriately, but respected and cared for. You've seen some in the news of employee morale. Certainly parades for teachers have been a popular thing. We've had some here in Cambridge, and we've seen some across the Commonwealth. We also have sidewalk birthday parties for key staff. And we can't all, I suppose we can't all have a flyover, but the flyover for nurses and the medical staff was pretty impressive. Those are all morale builders and show the staff that we are appreciative of them. Now we're going to move into a little bit of our Bill Belichick slide, despite the fact that Tom Brady is now in Florida. And that is, in a situation like this, how does one balance defensive moves as compared to offense? And a defensive move in this situation is as if we were dropped into a freezing stream, and all the blood from our extremities rushes to the core. To protect the core and protect the core of our business is to consolidate what we're doing and make sure our core business is viable. In a defensive mode, protecting resources, both financial and human resources, minimizing our spending or spending as appropriately as we possibly can, squeezing where areas need to be squeezed, and investing in areas that need to be kept alive. But to minimize spending and protecting those financial resources, and also consolidating your base of support. Where does your support come from? Do you have donors? Do you have members? Do you have funders and foundations? Consolidating that base of support is critical, and it goes back to one of our 10 points, and that is to have communication across the board. On the offensive side of the ball, there may be opportunities in this crisis situation of actually expanding your outreach. We've had situations where this Zoom technology and the virtual meeting technologies actually had more participation than if we were driving to a meeting. Expanding your outreach to potential new clients and new customers, new funders, new donors. There is an opportunity to do that even as we're in this unprecedented pandemic. And again, we are all now we all have common ground. The virus is actually bringing many of us together in ways that we would never see under, quote, normal circumstances, end quote. Again, in offense, you can adapt your services and programs. Perhaps there are ways to expand the services. There may be some untapped clients out there. There may be programs that in fact are more attractive to a broader audience than you thought. And again, you may want to go on the offense in certain instances of adapting services and programs to reach a broader constituency. And reallocating of resources. Oftentimes we have seen that resources can be reallocated within the organization with staff and programmatic reallocation that will make you stronger coming out the other side. An important example of offense and defense that we ran into was an executive director who was afraid she was going to need to let go of her development manager. one of the solutions to keeping the development manager was actually to reach across town to a like-minded organization and see if they would like to share the expense and the skills of a development manager. And that was an instantaneous bond between two organizations who are now sharing a development manager, expanding their development initiatives, and the development manager is still on her full salary being paid by two organizations. In
Frank,
thinking
one question we got.
Yeah, David, I can't
Frank?
quite hear you.
Sorry, one question we got, Frank,
No,
was,
good.
yeah, one question we got was, can you say a little bit more about consolidating the base of support, what that might look like?
Well, David, why don't you jump on that question?
Sure. Consolidating the base of support really means more purposeful outreach to some of your supporters, funders especially, but also other key stakeholders who you may not typically reach out to other than at times that you are planning for an event or maybe it's volunteers even. The idea really here is to really motivate or activate your organization to ensure that anybody who has been valuable in helping you get where you are knows where you're going and knows that you're there for them. And oftentimes, things that are typically left to staff to deal with, the board actually can pick up and be very valuable in doing some of that outreach. And long term, that can be really beneficial, as we'll talk about later.
David, it's Chris, and I just add to what David said. It's just increasing your communication. These people who have been your supporters, your stakeholders in the past are curious about how you're faring. And so the more you talk to them, the more reassured they're going to be and the more consolidated their support will be.
I think, Chris, you had an example of actually a significant donor in one of your situations of crisis. A significant donor came, looked at the action plan to come through the other side, and actually signed a big check for you on the spot. So that in fact can happen.
Frank, why don't we go ahead and do the poll to see how people feel they have been balancing these two challenges of offense versus defense over these last couple of months.
I think that would be really interesting to see how people have responded. Again, take a minute to fill out this.
20 seconds to do the poll. Yeah. And then I'm going to ask PJ to go ahead and pop up the responses.
Just letting a couple more responses come in and we'll publish the results, okay? Give me about 15 seconds.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, this would be an interesting profile. And again, as the scale shows on the slide, interesting to keep a balanced approach if possible.
And great, do we have some results? There we go, great. Wow, really good to see that a significant portion of you are doing as much on the offensive side to really think forward about the organization as on the defensive side and consolidating your base. So why don't we move to this, Frank, and you can talk about what
that's terrific.
The data says.
That's terrific. Again, we're going to look at playing defense for just a minute from a survival standpoint, and it's a little formula of survival. The speed of your understanding the situation. How fast did you dig into those facts? And the magnitude of the pivots or cuts or lifeboat choices you make what are the magnitude of those choices, and then the speed it takes you to put those changes in place. That's really survival mode, and we have a little source for that down in the corner of the slide. Keep your company afloat, Harvard Business Review. But remember too that inaction is a deliberate choice and has consequences. Don't fiddle when Rome burns is really something that we take to heart here. And inaction has consequences. And it seems to me the poll indicates that many of you have a balanced approach to the offense and defense. This particular poll would be interesting to see what actions you have taken, specific actions that you have taken. PJ, is this another poll? Can we have some show of how many froze hiring, how many did layoffs, how many reduced hours?
Yeah, this is our last poll, and so we'll see really how this maps to the general data that we saw earlier on from La Piana's surveys. I think in the Berkshires may have some very different characteristics of the organizations and the missions that might give us a different profile. So this will be good context for our next part of our conversation, which is thinking forward from here.
We'll leave it open for about another 30 seconds or so, okay?
All right.
Yes, well,
Sounds good.
PJ, everybody's responding very quickly. It's very good to see the activity in the group. Of course, the category of other can be very creative.
And if people have particular things that they are thinking about in terms of other, be happy to have you share those with us, either in the chat, if that's the way you'd prefer to do it, or in the Q&A, and even come on and talk about it. But if there are some things that are just creative ways, really, of just dealing with these defensive strategies, those are great to be able to share with your peers. Yeah, one great one here, just applying for as many grants as possible. The one thing many of us have the luxury of in this time is time. And it certainly does not hurt to reach out to new funders, even if they're not necessarily going to fund you on this round. It's getting in front of them, it's having them know more about you so that when you come back in the future, you are already starting the initiation of that relationship. So Frank,
David, there's interesting results of the poll. If you look at 35% actually have other ideas. So when we get to the Q&A, it might be fun to see what those other ideas. A significant portion renegotiated bill payments. So certainly there's a universal understanding of what all of us are going through. Some needed to have layoffs, and others looks like perhaps going from full to part-time, or taking a trimming salaries, or a way to get through this. But if there's some other ideas, it'd be fun to look at those in the Q&A.
So Frank, I'm going to move on to what the research says about playing defense versus offense.
Yeah, excellent, David. I know it's taking a little longer than we'd hoped, but from a standpoint of the Harvard Business Review, looking at the last 3 recessions, the most recent they looked at was 2008. But the best performing organizations actually were those that balanced cutting costs to survive and investing in some way to grow tomorrow. Looking at that balanced approach, 37% had a chance of great performance coming out the other side. And the performers who really just contracted and contracted and contracted only had an 11% opportunity of coming out the other side. Again, looking at our offense, we've talked about our defense, looking at our offensive opportunities, taking loans, going after new funders, but taking loans. We had one organization that just went to their bank and expanded their line of credit, looking at that as a stopgap measure before their payroll protection program funding came through. Also increasing of services, where in fact, if you go virtual or you increase your presence online, you can actually get a much broader constituency than you had before. We have a situation with interesting enough, a cemetery here in Cambridge, who is now doing online tours in their horticultural division. They now have bird walks virtually, and they're getting quite a lot of presence on the web. Finding cost efficiencies, we talked about developing new services and new programs and outreach, and again, creative fundraising. There's an arts organization in New York City that had to cancel their gala. They actually scrambled and put a gala on and an auction on the web, had a virtual auction that raised more money historically than they had ever raised before. Also opportunities here for us to know during a crisis, what have we really learned about our organization? And here, David, perhaps we could have a little Q&A as to what folks have learned about their organization, particularly board members and executive directors, on what they've learned about their organization that this crisis has brought into the spotlight. Oftentimes what we find is you've learned about an employee or key employees who step up in a situation that you maybe didn't expect, where somebody really stretches beyond what you anticipated. Other things about the organization that oftentimes happen is, what is the perception in the marketplace? Is the perception of your organization different than you expected? Or is your mission and vision still appropriate? Those are some of the things in the offensive steps that you've tried about learning about your organization. Are we getting any activity there, David? Because Mike's...
Let's see. Judith talked about developing a crisis flyer and distributing it to the community. That's an idea. A great idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Else got some thoughts.
David and Frank, it's Chris. Wendy Healy has asked a question about how important is the element of speed, and she offers the comment or the observation that in her organization chose not to do what some others have done, quickly fire everybody or put them on leave or whatever, but rather take some time to think about it and do it in a more sustained fashion. She asked us a comment about that. And I guess my comment would be, not having been through this pandemic, but with several organizations in severe financial crisis, I would say a two-pronged approach isn't bad. First, taking some quick action, which you communicate effectively and explain the reason for doing that. But then, of course, doing exactly what Wendy is suggesting here, stepping back and taking a good hard look at what the choices are and making a more thoughtful second step and communicating that quite thoroughly.
I'm going to add to that, and I'll also respond in the Q&A that sometimes, though, reacting quickly may be valuable if, for instance, in this instance, people have the opportunity to earn $600 extra on unemployment. So if you actually know that at some point you are going to need to reduce your workforce, and you've not been able to get PPP funding, then sometimes, in this instance, some people are actually earning more money in the short term, understandably, but at least they know sort of where they stand, and so they can start thinking about what might be next for them. So there is a balance, but I agree, being humane is essential in your thinking process and making these decisions.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree too. Although we want to act, we want to make decisions and act with some speed. I think it's very important to have your corporate culture and your organizational values drive those decisions. And taking a measured approach, if you have the opportunity to take a deep breath, and again have the financial wherewithal to do that, the employees that you have remaining in the organization are going to know exactly how you treated the employees that are no longer in the organization, and that reflects on your culture for sure.
One thing that came up here is that one person said that they called many of their longtime donors, individuals, just to see how they're doing, and always get the response, well, how are you doing? How's your organization? And that is incredibly valuable, just to have those connections and to recognize that, you know, the donors really do care about your organization. Hopefully it's really reinforcing for you. Frank, I wonder if we want to move on to areas of opportunity and talk about sort of how the organization can learn from the challenges that we've gone through. You want to just give us a brief overview?
Yeah, brief overview from a standpoint of the broad areas of uncovering opportunities where you may very well have found that you can leverage your core competencies and resources from a service offering standpoint. In a cost savings, look at your cost savings from the standpoint of, can you stretch out to a sister organization? Can you explore shared services? The little example that we put together on the development manager that is now being shared by 2 organizations. Are there service delivery vehicles either that you can reimagine? Certainly lots of organizations have gone from in-person to online, but cost savings from a standpoint of those areas. And are there opportunities for individual organizational growth? We've certainly had situations where staff, individuals on your executive team or your staff have stepped up, shown skill sets that were outside of their job description, moved into areas that needed to be covered, and you didn't expect them to be the one that would actually step into that situation. And having an opportunity for the staff people that remain in your organization to develop new competencies that they can carry forward is a terrific opportunity coming from a crisis situation. Crises uncover opportunities for your organization. You certainly have learned more about your staff. You've learned about the stakeholders that care for you. You've learned about the funders that are sticking with you. You've also gained insights from how individuals respond. Again, that low-level individual who is helping park cars is now, in fact, driving a clientele interactive service. There are examples galore about people stepping up to new opportunities within the organization. And again, this may be a time for you to explore that alliance with an organization that is competing for the same foundation dollars that you're competing for. Are there ways for you to sustain your mission by collaborating or sharing service with other like-minded organizations? Those opportunities certainly turn up in a crisis situation. And once again, how are you perceived as an organization? This was an opportunity to reaffirm your core values and assess your corporate culture moving forward. Remember Peter Drucker. Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. He came from the Cambridge neck of the woods. And of course, look at revisioning, or where do you see your organization downstream from now, or 3 years, 5 years? How are you serving your constituencies and your vision for the organization moving forward on the other side of this pandemic?
Well, thanks.
Now, David,
I'm going to talk a little bit.
Turn it back to you, David.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Frank. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we move forward from here, planning for re-entry. And the first thing, again, we're thinking about defense and offense. So from a defensive standpoint, safety and security are paramount. Now, we have lots of guidelines for thinking about how we restart our businesses, our various kinds of businesses. And those guidelines are helpful from the point of view, what the government is providing us. But really, each organization has to look at a number of different aspects of safety and security to make sure that what you're doing is going to be taking into account all of your stakeholders. They're the obvious things: physical distancing and so on. And actually, I'm going to just put into the notes, into the chat, a reference that I found very useful. And this, you'll see, there are a couple of other references I put in earlier on to some of the other work that we've been talking about. But this one really talked about how the scientists have talked about the physical space being perhaps the biggest determinant of the virus being transferred, and talking about how if you are in a single space for a long period of time, if anybody is infected, it just accumulates on itself. And it sort of sounds logical that over time, more of the viruses would be in the air, therefore more opportunities for people to absorb them. If you're in an outdoor space with air moving, or if you're moving through a building, such as even going to the grocery store, the risks for you, because you're not in that airspace for a long period of time, or for the individuals, is very low. The workers, on the other hand, are in that area for a long period of time. So sanitizing, distancing is important, but actually just thinking about how long people are physically in a space where you're not getting a lot of airflow is, I think, a major aspect of the physical space. Training people to do the right thing in those spaces. We can't just take it for granted everybody will do what they should do. It's something that we have to actually train towards. Another aspect of security is your cybersecurity. Well, everybody's gone to working from home, and we've sort of taken it for granted that all of our data is safe and secure. Hopefully people have paid some attention to those things. When you come back to the office, some of the same kind of issues of who has access to what and so on need to be paid attention to. It's also an issue to think about if, unfortunately, you do need to reduce your workforce. When people leave, do they still have access to your organization's data? Or have you thought about how to make sure that your data, which is essential to your business, is appropriately secured? And in a moment, I'll put up another reference that will help with thinking about some of those kinds of issues. Financial safety, financial defense, thinking through the cost structure implications of coming back to work. We know restaurants, for instance, are going to have some challenges if they have limited numbers of tables that they can turn. So thinking through and planning for those implications, making sure, if you have to reflect those issues in higher prices or in surcharges or in something, that you've done that and you're not ultimately hurting your organization even in this re-entry phase. Hopefully, and I saw earlier, people have been thinking about talking to lenders and leaseholders and so on, to make sure you're managing your expenses in the best possible way. So financial security, financial defense when you re-enter is important. Human resources, the process of rehiring people, bringing people back from furlough. You need to make sure you're looking at the various guidelines around what you can and should do in those circumstances, how to make sure people are continuing to get the benefits one way or another as they transfer from maybe your payroll to unemployment or back again. Thinking about options for staff who are not comfortable or don't want to come to a physical workplace. One thing that we've found is that in many organizations, people have been extremely productive working from home. And it's up to each of you to assess what productivity looks like, but it's less about the hours and more about what people produce in those hours. Obviously, there's no substitute for people being together, brainstorming, sharing ideas, and so on. So you want to create those opportunities. But you may want to think about whether people at least have options about how often they need to be in the office. Until childcare is opened up for some people, there aren't even choices. And for those people who you do ultimately need to let go from your payroll, continuity plans for those people. How are we going to make sure both we're covering the work that they were doing, but also that they have continuity in the benefits that they were getting? Making sure you understand the legal issues. And fortunately, there are lots of organizations out that are trying to help with providing this information. I've seen a lot of law firms that have put on webinars on different kinds of issues, both from an employee standpoint, from a PPP repayment considerations, which of course are constantly moving target. It seems like those are not going to be set in stone even for some time to come. And I'm guessing that for nearly all organizations that have been fortunate enough to get them, that they will actually ultimately be nearly completely forgiven. But again, it's been, I think, frustrating in the process, waiting for clarity around those issues. But again, playing defense, making sure you've thought through these issues from the point of view of your key stakeholders, your employees.
David, it's Chris. Just let me add one resource which people may or may not have thought about, and that is your insurance companies. Many insurance companies have employee benefits staff who can give you some real good practical advice about the law, how to meet it, what your choices are. So think about that.
Excellent. And whoops, I just want to go back there. Social media. Perception is everything. So whatever you're doing, you want to monitor how people are receiving it. And you want to make sure that you're being responsive in a really positive way that reflects the humanity of your organization. Again, in the chat, I'm putting up one more resource that I found useful in detailing some of the information around these safety and security concerns upon re-entry. Just want to make sure we're moving along fine here. If I want to summarize, though, sort of approaches to dealing with issues around sort of re-entry and even around continuously managing this crisis. The first one really is calmness, not overreacting, doing things in a very thoughtful manner. Things are constantly evolving, and it's easy to react quickly to things without necessarily thinking them all the way through or including all the people that need to be included. The second one is compassion. We will be judged by how we respond to all of the stakeholder groups that we interact with during this process. And compassion is obviously foundational to who we are as a nonprofit community and to what people expect. Consistency. It's very easy to use this as an opportunity to pick and choose some of the things that you do, don't do, some of the people that you support or don't support. But consistency is really going to be important, both so people know what to expect, but also from a legal standpoint, because there will certainly be some fallout from some of the decisions people make that you want to be able to fall back on and say, this is the approach we took, and we took it sort of across the board with these criteria in mind. Frank talked before about communication, communication, communication. We don't like to talk about bad stuff, but we have to talk about it in a positive light, because at the end of the day, your accomplishment of your mission depends on the continued success of the organization, continued viability of the organization. And that's not something to feel bad about. It's something to feel positive about, because there's a community out there that you are serving. Consequences, thinking about what happens if. So things are not going to go smoothly. We don't even know that re-entry, reopening is going to go smoothly. We may well take some steps back, but planning for consequences, or recognizing there will be consequences of actions that are taken, is something that you want to do before you take those actions. And as I sort of was talking about with contingencies, what if something changes? What if something goes wrong? What if I lose somebody who is really key to doing certain functions? How am I going to be able to make sure that my organization is continuing to progress and follow through on the action plans? One thing that we have advised folks is that to the degree that you're planning forward in a budgetary way, you might want to just do 3-month plans, 3 to 6 month plans, and contingencies as to what might change during those 3 months. And each month, revisit the plan and push it out another month. Because again, there are more unknowns than there are knowns for most of us at this particular time. Let's think future though. As we move forward, I mentioned at the beginning that I don't believe there's such a thing as a new norm, as normal, or even a new normal. I think that constantly we're going to have to be now rethinking how we achieve our mission. And the first thing to ask is, what do stakeholders need? And broadly speaking, we have 3 groups of stakeholders that we are serving in most of our organizations. There's the staff. And there, the kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves are, what aspects of working from home have they valued? Are some of those things that we want to retain as we move forward? Even if all of the restrictions are gone, are there some benefits? Are we getting the productivity? Are people feeling a high level of satisfaction with their work? Some will, some won't. What have they found challenging? Where are some of the obstacles to them being even more effective for your organization? And productivity. Again, thinking about different ways of measuring people's impact in this time. For your clients, have your clients been able to access your services? Many of you have not been able to provide them with services, but others of you have been able to. But have you reached all of the clients that you hoped to, either through online or through other mechanisms? What about those that you have been able to service? Have other people filled the gaps? Meaning, even if you're in the business of bringing people together for, for a museum or for entertainment, all of a sudden now there are lots more organizations vying for people's attention. So be conscious of where your clients are and what their choices now look like, because their needs may well have changed and your value proposition to them may well have to change. And then from a standpoint of funders, the question is, are they still passionate about your mission? And I think you'll find most of them, if you reach out to them, will show you that they are very much supportive of your organization, especially if they feel like you have made an attempt to do that outreach. But they may also have changed their perception of what your community needs. So while they may have funded you because they had one vision of what you'd be providing, they may have some different perspectives that are important to at least listen to. I'm not suggesting that one goes and completely changes direction because a funder says you should. I strongly believe that chasing funding is a dangerous thing to do if it takes you off mission. But you do need to understand different perspectives and see what flexibility people have in their willingness to fund in different kinds of ways. Listening to yesterday afternoon's panel of local philanthropists in the Berkshires, I was so impressed by how flexible the funders in the area are in their thinking. They want to support these organizations in the best possible way. They don't want to constrain, but they also want to be sure that the things that they care about are things that the organizations continue to provide. Some things that we have been hearing in our work with different nonprofits around the state is that, many of them will waive existing grant, both reporting requirements and grant restrictions. So that's one question one should ask. Some will convert their restricted grants into just general support grants, which right now is invaluable. In fact, most, I think, that I've talked to have been willing to do that in the short term. Some have actually offered additional funds, not just for the crisis, but you can ask if they would actually extend your grant so you have some security maybe for an additional year. These are questions that are worth asking. Providing new unrestricted grants. Many have put aside pots of money, if you will, just for the crisis. But again, thinking about, whether as you think forward to new programs, they would be willing to give you the seed money to try something different to be able to bring your services to your stakeholders is worthwhile. And obviously capitalizing on the rapid response grants that I know in the Berkshires and I know in other areas have been put together by some just amazing philanthropists. The second aspect of offense, after looking at what stakeholders needs, is to recognize your organization's strengths. These times have tested us all, and the question is, what has your organization done well? What have you learned from that? Your services, have you been able to be responsive to the current crisis? And has your staff demonstrated flexibility that allows you to think a little differently about what you might be able to do as you continue to contemplate, reopening? From an operations standpoint, has your organization been able to deliver some efficiencies in how your services have been provided? Maybe you've been able to combine different activities so that you can reach more people with less effort. Infrastructure-wise, has your organization been able to look at finance and HR and gain some efficiencies in how you've been able to deliver the support the services internally. And how about outreach? What we've been finding is that many organizations have actually expanded their outreach significantly by taking some of their services online. People they never thought of as potential consumers of what they are offering have been able to learn about the organization and capitalize on them, on their access to the services. And those are now part of your broadened stakeholder base that you're able to tap into as you think about the future of your organization. Also, getting new sources of support. We do find that some organizations are finding funding that they never thought about because they really had not been visible to those funders. And the last area to look at is your own management. Have you been able to be effective in your communications and maintain morale and productivity? These are strengths to build on and things that you want to be able to capitalize on more going forward. On the other hand, what about challenges that your organization has faced? As you think forward, as you think about what's next, what could your organization do better? What does it need to do better? On the service side, have the services that you provided proved to be viable and meeting the needs that are out there? Or do you perhaps need to make some adaptations there? On the operations side, has it proven that you've had too much infrastructure, maybe resources that have been underutilized in these last couple of months, or too little? Have you found that you've actually been stretched in some ways you didn't anticipate, and you need to find some ways of overcoming that as you envision the next phase of operations? From an outreach standpoint, have you been able to communicate a clear value proposition? Do people know what you're all about? Or is this an area where you really need to tighten up, make some decisions? And from a management standpoint, has change been overwhelming and helped you to understand that you perhaps have limited capacity to adapt and change? Or has or is that an area that that there's plenty of capacity? So these are things to think about as you go into the next phase. And one thing that Frank talked about earlier on, and I want to revisit here, is this is a really, really good time to think about whether partnerships could offset some of these challenges. Because you're not the only organization going through these challenges. People all around you are trying to overcome some of these issues. To the degree that you can share some services, perhaps, whether they're internal services of accounting, IT, with other organizations, so that you both can reduce your costs. Is this a time to be thinking about that? It's something that people don't spend enough time thinking about in general. We've even seen organizations that have shared fundraising efforts, you know, where they may have put on an auction, and 2 or 3 organizations with perhaps similar ideas, maybe they're in the arts world, but with very different offerings, have come together to share resources and to put on one event that gets an expanded audience. Is this a time to think about how strategic partnerships could offset some of the challenges that your organization has now and probably will continue to have in a reduced funding world?
Hey, David, this is Frank. We need to sprint to the finish line, I'm afraid. Got 5 minutes.
So with that in mind, we'll forego people are putting in the chat, but I actually will encourage people, please, to put in the chat some of the things you're seeing as opportunities, because I think, again, this is a place that you'll be able to learn from each other. And I'm actually going to give you another way in a moment of being able to do that. But I want to end with managing change. Change is inevitable and change is constant. And I'm going to use a model. Again, I will put in the chat a link to this model, so you will be able to read about it and be able to learn about it for yourself. It certainly isn't the only model for change, but it's one that I've used in the past as a guide. And it basically talked about 8 steps in change. And we have this first step in spades at the top here, creating a sense of urgency. So building off that, and I'll go right into it in the interest of time. The first step is to establish that sense of urgency. Most of our organizations already have that. So now what do you do? Well, it's forming a powerful guiding coalition, bringing together key people from your board, from your staff, other stakeholders who can be part of leading, both envisioning and leading change. The third part then is to have that group create a vision, and that vision is going to direct the change effort, and going to, out of it will come specific strategies that the organization needs to undertake. The next step, like we've talked about before, is about communicating the vision, making sure everybody who is going to be impacted by this knows about it. Empowering others to act on the vision. So at this point, giving the tools so people can move forward in their areas of your organization to implement the changes that need to happen. And encourage them to take risks. Encourage them to think out of the box. It's not something that nonprofits tend to be particularly good at, but now is an opportunity to do that. Planning for and creating short-term wins. People want to see progress. How will you measure your progress? Make sure that you broadcast that to your stakeholders so they're encouraged to continue to make those changes, make those wins. Next, consolidating the improvements. So once you've identified what it is that is making progress, make sure that's part of your routines. Make sure people are recognized for their efforts in helping you get there, and encouraged to continue the process. And finally, institutionalizing these new approaches. Make so that everything you've learned becomes part of the fabric going forward. So final recommendations. Set priorities. And I believe, by the way, this presentation is going to be made available for people to download, and we're available to talk to you more about it. But set priorities. So what is driving the need for the change? Get stakeholders on board. Establishing those short-term goals. Make sure you're measuring the impact of each change. Shortening your budget horizons, recognizing that you don't know what you don't know, and that you need to continuously reassess where you are, what you've learned, and how that will impact the organization going forward. Establishing a peer support group. This is hard work, and you don't ideally want to do it alone. You want to do it with other people who are going through similar things, maybe not in exactly your area, but the concepts behind all of these things are common. And finally, learning. Become a learning organization. Make learning part of the norm in your organization. Always ask the question, what have we learned? What's it telling us? what does that mean for our future? I mentioned at the very end there, establishing a peer support group. And what Leanna at the Berkshire Center for Nonprofits has agreed to do is, if you reach out to her at leanna@npcberkshires.org and let her know that you're interested in perhaps having a small group that you can connect with periodically, maybe every couple of weeks, to talk about some of these issues, she'll try to put those groups together. So I would encourage you to do that. It's going to be a really powerful support for you. And then finally, if you want to talk more with us about some of your specific issues, we have set up a free 1 hour session, 1 o'clock on Wednesdays. It's a drop-in, come, bring whoever to talk about some of these ideas and issues and help people just think through these challenging times and make the most of them. So hopefully this has been helpful, and thank you very much for participating in this.
Thank you, David Harris, Frank Reece, and Chris Dam, for giving us that intensive conversation on first things first, engaging your stakeholders, and really not going it alone. And that is great advice. Right on the NPC website, there is a little banner that says COVID-19 resources, and there is a group of pro bono consultants right on there. So if you haven't looked, we hope you will take advantage of these great consultants right in the Berkshire region, as well as the drop-in session you just heard about, to talk through some of your first things first issues.